It's a cross-sport Syracuse football and Syracuse basketball recruiting update.
You are Locked On Syracuse, your daily podcast on the Syracuse Orange. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome into Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer, and thank you for making us your first listen of every single day here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day, and we are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And on today's show, we got some positive news with Syracuse football and Syracuse basketball recruiting. That's right. It is a cross-sport episode here on today's show of Locked On Syracuse. Four-star safety Demetres Samuel Jr., he flipped his commitment back to Syracuse. I'm going to explain all of that later on here on the podcast. And also, Syracuse basketball picked up its second commit in the class of 2025 with 6'5" forward Aaron Womack. We are breaking it all down here on today's episode of Locked On Syracuse. And this episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. All right, so let's start off with the football news that happened just a couple of days ago. Demetres Samuel Jr., he is back. Demetres Samuel Jr. is a 2025 6'2", 180-pound consensus four-star safety from Florida. He verbally committed to Syracuse football on Sunday night. On 3, has him as high as the 123rd overall player in the country, so that's really high up there, and the 11th overall safety in the class of 2025. So this is one of the best Syracuse football recruits in 2 decades, and that is not an exaggeration. That is not an hyperbole. If you go check out the stats out there, he is one of the best commitments Syracuse football has had in 2 decades. He easily also becomes the highest ranked recruit in the class of 2025. That's good stuff. And regarding Syracuse's 2025 class, it now has 29 total players, which has got to be up there as among the highest in the country in terms of total commits. And overall, this is really what's more important. It is the 36th overall recruiting class in the country at this very moment. I don't need to give you all chapter and verse of Fran Brown and his recruiting like we did over the summer, but just for some brief context for you, that is the same ranking that Syracuse had in its 2024 class. And it is also essentially 2 decades unprecedented for Syracuse football. Okay? Their recruiting in the last couple of years with Fran Brown has been unprecedented for 2+ decades with this program. He has lived up to that end of the bargain. We still need to learn if he's really, truly a good head coach, right? We've seen some really good regarding his head coaching skills. We've also seen some bad, but regarding the recruiting, we cannot deny that he has done a terrific job with this program. Now, here's where we got to dial it back a little bit. We got to dial back the excitement. Sorry, hate to be that guy, but this is just a verbal commitment, okay? A verbal commitment. And I'm going to explain to you why that is so important in just a moment here on this episode. Keep in mind, all right, the early signing period. That means when these prospects can officially put pen to paper to attend the programs that they are verbally committed to is on December 4th. All right, December 4th. That's still a couple of months. So there is a long time between now and December 4th for good or bad, for better or worse for Syracuse football and every program out there in the country. So there's a lot of time for things to change regarding these recruiting rankings. But for now, it is better to have him than it is obviously not to have him. Demetres Samuel Jr., a 4-star safety, flipping back to Syracuse football the other day. He can also play wide receiver. And if you want to learn more about him as a player, well, I had a 20-ish minute conversation with his high school coach back in April So you can check that out. And also, I've talked to Locked On recruiting expert Brian Smith a number of times on this podcast, breaking down Demetres Samuel Jr. as a player. And the link to those podcasts will be in the description below, so you can check them out right after you are done watching or listening to this one. All right. Now, here's the timeline regarding Demetres Samuel Jr. He originally verbally committed to Syracuse as a 4-star athlete back in March. Not only that, he was in the class of 2026. So this was a couple years down the line. But notice how I said off the top that this guy is now in the class of 2025. Here we go. Here's where the kicker happens. Here's where it gets a little bit spicy. All right. Samuel flipped his commitment. He flipped to Florida in July. All right. He flipped to Florida in July, and he reclassified as well into 2025. So that's where he is now in the class of 2025 comes from. He was originally with Syracuse as an athlete in 2026. He flips his commitment to Florida in July and reclassifies to 2025 until just a couple of days ago, he reflips back to Syracuse. And I texted Brian Smith after this happened. It was on Sunday evening. How often does a prospect flip to one school and then flip back to the same original one he was at, right? That's what Samuel has essentially did. He was at Syracuse, then he went to Florida, now he's back to Syracuse. And he said it happens once in a while, but it's not often. So I don't have any examples off the top of my head of a player doing that, for better or worse for Syracuse. I know players that will flip on signing day, but that doesn't mean that they went from their original school to a different school back to their original school. Does that make sense? If you have any examples of that, feel free to leave a comment in the comment section below, players that you know of that have done that off the top of your head. I just don't. So what does this mean with Syracuse football in their recruiting? All right, this is where we get a little bit more philosophical here on today's podcast. This is why building relationships is so important. This is why maintaining relationships, even when a commitment doesn't go your way, is so important. Think about it for a second. A player verbally commits. A verbal commit is great. But at the end of the day, I told you that these prospects cannot sign until December 4th at the earliest. That's if they choose to sign in the early signing period. They might not. You have to be able to maintain those relationships you build even when you get the commitment. And because of that fact, even when you lose a commit to a different school, you still have to maintain that relationship because you never know if they're going to want to flip back to you. You never know if they're going to want to circle back. Even if that commit doesn't circle back with you. Well, guess what? We now live in the world of the transfer portal. And having that relationship with the prospect is so crucial. This is why building relationships is so critical. I have to be honest. When he flipped his commitment in July to Florida, sure, I wished Samuel nothing but the best with his career and his recruitment and everything like that. But I was a little bummed. And the reason why I was bummed was not just because he left Syracuse, but because I didn't think Syracuse was going to get him back. I really didn't. I didn't think he was going to get it. They were going to get him back. Here's why. Florida is an SEC program. They got a lot of money. I know they're not very good right now, but they're going to get a better coach than Billy Napier at some point, and they're not going to be bad forever. That's the reality. That is historically one of the best football programs in the country. That's not an exaggeration either. Historically, they've been very good, just not very good recently. That's going to change. I promise you. But not only that, all right, that's just one thing. It's one thing to say that Florida is a great program, right? They're in the SEC. I get that. Cool and all. You probably don't want to hear that. Well, Samuel is actually a legacy to Florida, and he's from the state. Think he's from the state and a legacy. He is the cousin to former Florida safety Marcus May. You may have heard of Marcus May. May played for the University of Florida from 2013 to 2017, and he was a second-round pick to the New York Jets. He was actually a pretty good player. I'm a New York Jets fan. kind of bummed that he left at the time he left. And he is now in his 8th career NFL season. So he's carved out a nice career professionally, Marcus May, and they're cousins. He's a legacy. So you can honestly see why I, along with many other people, thought that when he flipped his commitment to Florida, it was a done deal. That Syracuse was just not going to get him back. But again, what happened? Syracuse football built a relationship with him. Obviously, Samuel trusts them enough that he flips back to Syracuse. And his recruitment isn't over, in my opinion. This is my opinion. I don't know this for fact, but it's not over. Again, it's verbal. And he cannot sign until December at the earliest. December 4th, early signing period. But they have the relationship in place with him. That is what is so important. So what I will say is, let's just be happy about this. Like, let's be happy. This is great. They get a 4-star safety, one of the 5 best prospects in the past 2 decades to commit to Syracuse football. He easily becomes the highest ranked recruit for Syracuse in the class of 2025. And now they are inside the top 40 overall in the country in the class of 2025. This is what Fran Brown was brought here to do, to bring some of these dogs from high school into the program, or maybe even the dogs from Georgia in the transfer portal. That is what Fran Brown was brought here to do. And he has certainly lived up to his billing as a recruiter, as someone who can build relationships with these kids. Because at the end of the day, they're kids. They're younger. Actually, in high school, they are kids. In college, in the transfer portal, they're young adults, but you might as well call them children. And Fran Brown knows how to build those relationships. That is why they are able to get prospects that they would not have been able to get in the last 2 decades with other coaches. But they got it with Fran Brown. So once again, the big news, it broke on Sunday evening. Demetres Samuel Jr. reflipped back to Syracuse from Florida. He is a 4-star safety in the class of 2025, and he is easily the highest ranked commit in Syracuse's 2025 class. It's a good day to be a Syracuse football fan. Now, coming up, we're not going to talk about football recruiting, but we're going to stay on the recruiting end because Syracuse basketball picked up its 2nd commit in the class of 2025, and we're going to break it all down here on Locked On Syracuse. It's time to highlight my Roy Player of the Week. Roy is a new platform that lets fans make contributions directly to their favorite athletes. Download Roy for iOS or Android and enter referral code Locked On, and you'll automatically be entered into a sweepstakes to win $5,000 cash. There's no purchase necessary, and you can void where prohibited. This week, we've selected King Joseph Edwards because he had 3 sacks in only a quarter against Holy Cross. King Joseph Edwards, the 4-star true freshman, he was terrific in his limited playing time, and why I'm an advocate for him to play a little bit more for Syracuse football, because he can certainly help out that pass rush. If you were impressed with his performance on Saturday, you can show him some love too. Just hop on Roy and throw in a few bucks. If everyone pitches in just like, I don't know, $10, it adds up fast for King Joseph Edwards. Now you have the chance to show your appreciation for King Joseph Edwards and his standout performance this week, as well as what he'll continue to bring to Syracuse football. Get off the sidelines and into the NIL game with Roy. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. And Syracuse football travels to UNLV for their first road game of the season on Friday night at 9 p.m. Eastern. In the Orange, for the second time this year, they're underdogs, and honestly, the spread on this one is bigger than the one they had in Georgia Tech. The Georgia Tech game, they were 3.5-point underdogs. They were also at home. This one, they're on the road against number 25 UNLV. Syracuse is a 6.5-point dog to UNLV, and their money line is plus 188. Will Syracuse cover? Dare I say win outright? Well, You can decide that for yourself on FanDuel. That's FanDuel.com. Let's talk about Syracuse basketball recruiting, shall we? Because we just talked about Syracuse football, the positive news with Demetres Samuel Jr. reflipping back to the Orange. Now, let's talk some basketball because the Orange got their second commit in the class of 2025. That's right. The news broke yesterday afternoon, and I am pumped. 6'5", 170-pound, three-star forward from Wisconsin, Aaron Womack. Welcome to Syracuse. He verbally committed once again on yesterday afternoon. Aaron Womack also had offers from UW, Milwaukee, Murray State, UIC, Buffalo, Illinois State, Southern Utah, and UW Green Bay. Now, Womack, this is not a player that is ranked nationally, but he is a three-star prospect over on On3. Once again, he is the second commit in the class of 2025 for Syracuse. Syracuse's other commit in 2025 is none other than five-star forward Sadiq White, who is ranked as high as 15th overall in the country over on ESPN. We have obviously high expectations for Sadiq White when he gets to campus. As far as the overall class of 2025, if you check the On3 rankings right now, they're not necessarily as high as you would expect or what you would want necessarily. Syracuse is 38th overall on On3 with Sadiq White and Aaron Womack. But I'll explain later on that I am optimistic that that ranking will go up. All right. Now, as far as Aaron Womack is concerned, I texted someone pretty high up in the recruiting industry right after the commitment was announced. This is what the high-ranking person had to say. He is, quote, a long wing who can shoot it and store it, switchable defender, not ranked really, but had a really strong summer. Cuse really likes what he can be down the line. All right. My thought on that assessment, honestly, is this is a long-term play recruit right here. This isn't someone necessarily that is going to probably contribute in the 2025-2026 season. So that year, not this year coming up in a couple months, but the following year, right? That would be his freshman season. I doubt it, but you know what? Anything is possible. This is someone that you're hoping can grow to be a really solid contributor by 2026, 2027, etc. This is a developmental recruit right here. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but you know, there are expectations with recruits. Sadiq White, when he comes to campus, there's going to be high expectations for him to produce right away. With Aaron Womack, there's a little bit more time for him to develop. It's just based on the ranking and what this high-ranking recruiting person has to say. All right. So also what Aaron Womack said about Syracuse, there were a lot of messages he gave to On3's Joe Tipton. But in summary, because there's a lot out there, he said all of the right things. All right. He loves the fan base. He loves how the coaches believe in his ability. They break down his strengths. They break down his weaknesses. He also mentioned how he has a strong relationship with the women's coach, Felicia Leggett-Jack. So, hey, everyone's pitching in on the recruiting effort, and that's good to have cross-sport men and women recruiting effort right there. That's a good thing. Found that kind of interesting that they have a strong relationship as well. He also loves how the coaches see him having a lot of potential, right? Syracuse was like, based on the offers that I mentioned, Syracuse is the only one that was in the Power Five. So clearly they see something in him for better or worse, but I'm going to choose to lean for the better. And he said all the right things once again. If you want to check it out, you can go to the On3 website when you're done with this and done watching the podcasts about Demetres Samuel Jr. I'm excited. I'm glad that Syracuse got another player in the boat for 2025. As far as other recruiting news for Syracuse basketball, all right? Start off with a little bit of the bad, but I promise we're going to get to some good, all right? Syracuse, as you may recall, I mentioned this on a couple of podcasts either last week, the week before, whenever I did another recruiting update for you guys, that they were on a couple of finalists, right? It was 4 stars, Derek Dixon and Ryder Frost, but I mentioned on those podcasts that the Orange are not front runners for those prospects. Yes, they're on the final list. That's a good thing. You want to be on final lists. That gives you a chance. They're not the front runners, and as expected, those prospects went elsewhere. Derek Dixon committed to North Carolina, so he's staying in the ACC. And also staying in the ACC with Notre Dame is Ryder Frost. And just a side note with Notre Dame, they're doing pretty well recruiting-wise in basketball now. They're starting to mirror their football recruiting. Very interesting. Maybe on the come-up. Good for them, I guess, but not good for the rest of the ACC that they're starting to figure it out with basketball again. Now for some good. All right, let's get to some good now. It is October 1st when you are watching this or listening to this or when this episode premiered, right? We are officially on Kiyan Anthony watch. Kiyan Anthony has been really transparent and really honest with his recruitment for quite a while. And I see some fans of Syracuse in particular kind of panicking about it because he hasn't committed to Syracuse yet. And what I would tell those fans is, look, he's been honest. He has said he is not going to commit to a school until October or November. That's what he has said, his own words. He has also said that he is going to take other visits other than Syracuse. All right. Keep in mind that the Orange are in his final 6, along with Florida State, Auburn, Ohio State, Rutgers, and USC. And I believe he was actually in USC last weekend on a visit. Having said that, Syracuse is still considered the main leader in the clubhouse for him. They are still the consensus favorite. That's a good thing. Can it change? Sure, it can change. But they are the front runner for Kiyan Anthony, according to pretty much every major recruiting analyst out there. Joe Tipton, Jamie Shaw, 24/7 High School Hoops, Sam Lance, you name it. All right, any of those top recruiting experts, all are pretty much pegging Kiyan Anthony to go to Syracuse. Does it mean it's going to happen? Not necessarily, but those recruiting experts aren't usually wrong. So that is a positive sign for Syracuse basketball. And once again, it's October 1st. We are officially on Kiyan Anthony watch. So Kiyan Anthony, if you're watching this, if you're listening to this, whenever you're ready, we're here for you. All right, that's all I'll say. Whenever you're ready, we are here. Also, keep an eye on a number of prospects in the class of 2025. The options are certainly limiting now. They are diminishing as we speak. They're going elsewhere. But Syracuse is still in the running for these 4-star prospects. All right, Shon Abaev, Tyler Jackson, and Asher Elson. They are still in the running for those players in the class of 2025, of course, alongside Kiyan Anthony. All of those recruitments are kind of a mystery right now. With Shon Abaev, it's not, because he's just visiting everywhere right now, and that was pretty much known that he was going to go to plenty of other places. He did visit Syracuse in August, in late August, I should say. But he hasn't released a final list or anything like that. Tyler Jackson, the 4-star guard, his recruitment has been pretty quiet for a while, and same with Asher Elson. It's pretty quiet on those ends, but doesn't mean that Syracuse is out per se. It's just a little bit quiet, and I would say keep an eye on it. Keep an eye on those ones, because Syracuse, with all their offers in the class of 2025 that we definitively know of, with Aaron Womack, honestly, I did not know that they had an offer for him. But with those ones in particular that we know of, those are the only ones that are left on the board for Syracuse basketball. All right. Once again, Shon Abaev, Tyler Jackson, and Asher Elson, along with, of course, Kiyan Anthony. Kiyan Anthony watch. It's October 1st. All right. So that is your Syracuse basketball recruiting update. Once again, the Orange get their second commit in the class of 2025 in 3-star forward Aaron Womack. He joins 5-star forward Sadiq White in the class, giving the Orange a top 40 class in the class of 2025. But I imagine that it'll go up when a couple of these recruits hopefully decide to commit to Syracuse. As far as future plans for the podcast, well, tomorrow we got a guest on the podcast. It is none other than the host of the Let's Run podcast with Jason Kelly. Jason Kelly, if you don't know him, he covers all things UNLV because, hey guys, spoiler alert, Syracuse football is playing UNLV on Friday night. And tomorrow's episode is going to be a great opportunity for you guys to learn a lot about UNLV. We talked about the team overview. They're ranked for the first time in program history. So we went over that and Barry Odom. We also talked about the offense and the defense. And also he gave a score prediction as well, but you're going to have to wait for mine on Friday morning, I should say. I'm going to give that out on Friday morning on Poll Friday. All right. Once again, that is coming up on tomorrow's podcast. We got Jason Kelly talking all things UNLV and Syracuse. It's a good episode. It's a good conversation. So make sure to check that out tomorrow. I'm also going to circle back to what I said earlier in the podcast regarding Demetres Samuel. I'm going to leave a link to a couple podcasts in the description below so you can go ahead and watch those right now if you really want. All right, you can watch those right now. There's an interview with his high school coach that I did in April, and there is also a podcast that I did over the summer back when Demetres Samuel was still in the class of 2026. Both of them are a little bit dated, but it gives you a little bit more information as far as who he is as a player. All right, everyone. Thank you all so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. If you like this video, click that like button. And if you really liked it, subscribe to the channel, turn on those notifications so you know right away when I'm dropping the next podcast. And everyone, take care.